There we go. Okay. All right, we'll give everybody a few minutes to filter in here. Let's see, just have that should be it, right? Because Jenica couldn't make it for this time, so okay, yeah. Then we'll get started with you four. So again, as always, thank you again for meeting. I was really excited to hear and to see that people still wanted to be involved, beyond the normal timeline of the LCL internship and wanting to be a part of this and helping me do this research. Like I said in the email, apologies that this step is taking so long. Part of that is me being new at this and maybe not very good at, describing the coding scheme, and us also just doing what's normally part of the process, ironing out some of the wrinkles, again, trying to come into a closer range of agreement on our interpretations, just so that there's, verifiable consistency when this is all said and done, and we come out with this amazing paper that makes headlines and, gets you all famous and we want people to be able to go back and see, oh, like maybe I don't think they made the right choice here, but I can see the choices that they made and they were doing it as a group, and it wasn't just a factor of you know, this person Garrett pressuring people into seeing things the way he did. Right, they had this reliability as a group of raters. So yeah, I'm hoping that going through some of the revisions, well, all of them together as a group, will give you guys a chance to, you know, ask questions and kind of give feedback directly instead of having that all done remotely with the video training method that I used previously. So yeah, at any point, if any of this isn't clear, or you know, it feels arbitrary to you, or you think there might be a better word to describe this, or right, this category is kind of blurry still, you know, that's all what I'm wanting to hear. Because it, you know, if this is making sense to me, great, but if it doesn't make sense to you guys, then it doesn't help anyone. So that's what we want is clarity for you as well. And then, yeah, so that's what we're doing today, is just going through the edits I've made. And then either later today or tomorrow, I'll send out the new sample, and I'll try to include some examples in the new coding scheme document that I'll send out to you guys. So you can also refer to those, and I'm going to give some instructions at the top of the coding scheme document that you get, so that you kind of, the things that I'll express in this meeting will be put down on paper for you guys to refer back to. And then obviously I'll be sending this recording to Jenica, and if you want to review this video as well, you can. You know, as much information and resource I can give to you when you feel like, I don't know what to put here, or just again, so that you feel like the language that I'm giving you to use as a parameter for your coding, that's what the goal is. So yeah, let me do a screen share. Okay, so here we are, version 4.0. We are expanding some things. We cut out a lot. We're no longer worrying about giver or recipient. I still think that there is something interesting there, because I'm not sure if the president can be, if he can be impeached for receiving a bribe, if he has to be the one giving the bribe for that to be impeachable. I don't know if there's, right, there's the sense that if he's simply taking bribes, if that's included in the constitutional clause. So I think that it's still an important piece, but I think trying to examine that element would require a different orientation, a different, you know, I think you'd have to do a sense index with some collocates maybe to look at bribery with, you know, used in the context of impeachment or government officials or something like that, to kind of pin it down, because it might be more of a legal question. Brett's opinion was that maybe, you know, bribery does include either the one giving or receiving because of the lexical coverage that bribery gives, right? When we talk about bribery, you kind of have to specify giving or offering. There's not a separate word for, you know, the person giving the bribe versus the person who's getting the bribe. In language, we tend to, if something is common enough, we productively create a new utterance to describe that thing. And so because we don't have that for bribery, he thinks that maybe bribery would include both of those. But is that what people at the founding understood bribery to mean in the Constitution? So there's, you know, I think there's a lot there, but it's tangential enough that we're just going to cut that part out. And then I've changed the sense of perception. I guess we're kind of working from the back end here, but I've changed sense of perception to sense of transparency. Legality and wrongness are, they're not really binaries. They're kind of on a spectrum, right? How immoral is something is really hard to determine. So I think, so it's pointed out to me that those are probably not very helpful categories. So we're dropping those. But I do think that the hidden part is something that I want to keep, because when I think about a bribe, and you've probably seen this, it does seem pretty typical that it involves money so far. So my question is, what makes a bribe different from a campaign donation? You know, where the person is giving money, I'm giving money to you to go be my elected official. Why is that not a bribe? Is it because that's something that's publicly disclosed and totally transparent? Say, hey, like I am biased, here's my agenda, here's my program, I'm giving money to this person for this reason. And maybe a bribe is considered a bribe because it's kept private, it's meant to deceive, it's meant to not be known publicly. So I still want to see if that's something that we can see reflected in the data. Maybe we will, maybe we're not, maybe we won't. Yeah, so sense of transparency, is it hidden? Is there any indication that those involved tried to keep this bribe hidden from the knowledge of others, or that those involved tried to actively do something that kept others from the knowledge of the bribe? So that's the parameter for whether or not it's hidden. And I'll explain this blank category with the sense of place or sense of object, because each main category now has the option of leaving it blank. Yeah, so a sense of transparency, if it's hidden or not. Are there any questions there? And one thing I will say with all of these, because we're working from a theory of, plain meaning or original public meaning, right? We're not expecting us in this group to be experts. We're just expecting us to be ordinary, reasonable, fluent speakers of English. And so on some of these, if you feel like you need to follow your intuitions or your instincts, how you naturally interpret something, go ahead and do that. Just keep in mind that there is this accountability, or what we did last time with the calibration, we will likely do again, where we'll be reviewing our coding together. And so please try to keep in mind or track or recall somehow what your reasons were for making that decision. So if you do feel like you're just kind of going with your gut and, this is just, it just seems like it's hidden, but I can't quite pin it down, like, it's not totally explicit, again, that's okay, but try to, maybe I'll do this, I'll make a separate column in the spreadsheet for justification or reasons where you feel like your coding isn't going to be clear on its own, and you want to give that reason. So yeah, that's kind of one big point that I wanted to express there. I talked with Brett about the example from the last sample where it was talking about Samuel and Lucre and judgment, and there was this question about, well, how do you know when you can connect meaning between clauses, or is this just a separate list of things that he did? Maybe I'll just read the example so it's Yeah, right here. So Samuel, who had been appointed judges over Israel, walked not in his ways, but turned aside after lucre and took bribes and perverted judgment, and the evil effects of their venality and consequent perversion of public justice being known and felt. So there was this question about, oh, like for some of us, we see lucre and then took bribes and perverted judgment, like we see those as, right, all being related to each other. And then some of us thought, well, it just sounds like these are different, separate, independent acts that he did. And then, me and Brett kind of got into, right, what would it look like in a syntax tree, and where's the independent clause and what's the dependent clause and all these things. And right, there is this technical linguistic way to kind of see, okay, according to the principles of this language, what's going on here. But I don't need you guys to do that. I don't need you to be psychologists and understand, oh, this language seems to be expressing that they're trying to hide this or that. I just need you guys to be who you are, normal, if not above average speakers of the language. And so, yeah, if you feel like you have to stick to your idiosyncrasies and your means of interpretation, then yeah, I'm going to provide you a separate column to give or to track, what was my reason here, or if I had to try to specify why I coded this as such, I will, let me put that here. I want to use the notes column this time around for something very specific, which is giving the multiple senses or categories that you think apply if a concordance line you think has multiple senses at play. And so that was poorly worded. I'll reiterate that when we go over the other section. So yeah, sense of place. This one also has a lot of changes. We're still looking at the nature of the setting for those involved in the bribery, but I'm trying to make it more clear, just some lines that we can draw in the sand of, okay, this is one thing and this is a separate thing. I think the legal political versus business institutional was was too vague. So I think this might be a little bit better. We're going to separate out that which is the context of government or a public institution. So anything, let me move my window over here so I can read. Bribery in the context of the executive, legislative, or judicial branches, or other government agencies, or other organizations provided by the authority of the state and funded by the public's tax dollars, like schools, law enforcement, infrastructure services, etc. So I think that public institution might be a modern day conception. I'm not sure if they would have called it that at the founding, but to me, I think it's a helpful lens to see, okay, what is this context? Are they in the court? Is this a judge? Is this, again, an elected official, a politician, someone running for office? Or is this a school board member? Or is this, is this a police officer or something like that, that we might not consider necessarily legal or political in nature, but is basically an extension of those things. And so, again, if it's, right, Department of Homeland Security or Parks and Rec or anything on the local level or federal level that is coming from the government provided by that authority as a public institution. And then we're contrasting that with a business or a private institution. So bribery in the context of companies, private universities, corporations, religious groups, charities, or other organizations not provided by the authority of the state and tax funds. So I think that helps delineate a little bit better. Okay, here's our two boxes: a private institution, a business, or a not-for-profit, a nonprofit, right? This private group, private organization that isn't, it could be regulated by the government, but it's not provided by or supported as something given exclusively by the sovereignty. So are there questions there? How are we feeling about that change?
So if it's something like a private institution bribing government officials, would that fall under the other category where it's kind of multiple senses, and then we would separate it like that?
Yeah, exactly. And so yeah, why don't we just go right there with the other category? I have added this fourth reason for which you might use other. I know there's a lot of reasons now to use other, but again, it's kind of like, okay, this is something that might happen, but it's not super important, so we're just going to put it over here with other. But yeah, if you think multiple senses apply, then that's where you'll use the notes column, where you can list which of the multiple senses are at play, and you'll list that in alphabetical order by the first letter of the category. So in this case, yeah, if it's, if it is a soldier bribing a politician, right? Oh, it's military and it's government, it's GPI, then G comes before M, so put GPI space M. And yeah, we might see that a lot. I can't remember from the last data set how much of that was going on, but definitely, I don't think people are going to just bribe within whatever stratosphere of society they're in. But yeah, so if it's multiple, use other, and then use the notes column to list which different senses you think could work there.
So you don't want us to use the notes column for our personal notes about the concordance sign, but rather for the multiple senses?
Yes, and part of that is just standardization, so that, okay, if it is multiple senses, we have one way of coding, on this side that, okay, people aren't disagreeing a lot, they're all putting other, maybe they're just disagreeing about which multiple senses, so that's different from, oh, they're totally disagreeing because this person thinks it's GPI and M, and this person thinks it's BPI and M. Oh, that doesn't match. That's zero right there. But instead, be like, oh no, it's true. They're both marking other. Okay, let's see what the multiple senses are, and then using the notes column exclusively for that, I think helps clarify what to put in the notes column, or when you need to put something there. But like I said earlier, I do think, like I said, if we're going through calibration, I don't want anyone to feel like, oh, he's asking me, why did I pick this? And I can't remember, I just felt like I should. I still want to give you space to be able to also keep track of that. So I'll provide a separate column, but we want to have a designated, and this is a tip from Brett, a designated space where, okay, all you're putting here is specifying what multiple senses there are. So yeah, does that seem okay? Is that too crazy? Okay, sweet. And then, yeah, the interpersonal relationships is pretty much the same. Just keep in mind, this is excluding, right, entities beyond just people bribing people. And like we said, maybe you'll want to do multiple senses, but if a student is bribing their teacher, maybe that's GPI and IR or something like that. But I think we just need a category for when people aren't doing it really in the context of something bigger than themselves. It's just, hey, I'm doing this for you, you do this for me. And then military, that was one that a few of you commented on. Hey, this is military, it's pretty clear, maybe we should have a label for that, and I agree. And then again, keep in mind is if it it's not meant to include people from GPI or BPI. It just needs to be kind of within the military internally. And if it's going outside of that, then you'll want to use other to describe that. So yeah, and then let's talk about blank real quick. So we're seeing that there might be a difference between a concordance line being too ambiguous and a concordance line just not even addressing the aspect of the category that we're coding for. So maybe it's not that the sense of place is too ambiguous, it's just the sense of place is absent from that, from those keywords in context. So if the quick simply does not address the sense of place aspect of bribery, and this is true for sense of object as well, leave the cell blank. This is different from other, that the usage is not ambiguous, rather it lacks any context regarding the nature of the thing, or in this case, the nature of the place involved in the bribe. So I think kind of at the outset, that seems like, oh, if it's too ambiguous or it doesn't address this, that seems like it's really hard to tell. But I think if you think through some examples, for example, we could say, I hate it when my teachers get bribed. We have a sense of place that we could identify, but is the sense of object ambiguous? Well, yes, but it's not really spoken of at all in the concordance line, right? It's not a factor in the context that we have. And so instead of saying, oh, we know enough to see that the concordance line is talking about the object of the bribe, or it's talking about the place of the bribe, but it's too vague to know what that object or that setting is. Instead, we're saying, this is just, again, this is just not even here. We don't know enough about the object or the place to know that it's even ambiguous. It's just not addressed. And I think that's important to separate, because we don't, at least me, I don't want to come through all this coding and see that, oh, like it's when the object or the place of the bribe is talked about, it's too vague, it's too ambiguous to really know what specifically this word means for these contexts. I think it's more helpful instead to be able to say, oh, sometimes it's talked about and we know there's an object, we know there's a setting, but it's too ambiguous, versus, oh, we weren't given enough information in this context to have anything to say about the object or the place of the bribe. So again, go with your natural inclinations, what you tend to see being reflected in the context. But blank is going to be, if we're looking at maybe levels of clarity. Yeah, go ahead, Amy.
I was just wondering, I was thinking about the place. We're only using examples from COFIA, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if it does talk about like a school setting, is it considered government if they don't necessarily have, because I feel like they talk about college sometimes, but like any kind of scholarly thing, is that considered public or is it private at this point in history?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I was assuming that.
Other.
Yeah, no, I was just assuming, yeah, that a school or a college would be, most of them would be public like they are now. But yeah, I guess I don't really know at what point in history that kind of becomes the norm or the standard.
Well, and if it was like a professor, and I didn't know if said professor was from University of Utah or BYU, I mean, that could be that's like a technicality, but what would we classify schools to be? I mean, we could keep it on public, regardless of if it's like BYU where it is technically considered a private institution. We could do
Yeah.
that.
I feel like I might be wrong, but I feel like in this case with the public versus private institution, it's kind of going more for like where they're geared towards, not so much who's owning it. Because I feel like with the public institution, it's more like the schools are meant for the betterment of the public, whereas private institutions are usually meant for the betterment of the people who work there.
Yeah.
Oh, I get you're
Also,
saying like business with people that work there. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, keep going.
but also there's a difference between like corruption in a public school, because that's corruption in a government owned thing, versus corruption or bribery in a private institution, because that's just like that's unconnected to the government, which I feel like is a big distinction.
Yeah. No, these are all really good points. And yeah, I feel like so part of me says I want to be able to take this coding scheme and use it for each decade surrounding an impeachment after the founding. And so maybe I don't want to just assign schools, to public or private because of that historical uncertainty on my part. But at the same time, maybe it would just be easier just to say, hey, we know, okay, right, the equivalent of our high schools back then, anything below college, we feel like that's going to be pretty clear. Let's say that's public, and once you hit college, people involved with that kind of institution, let's just mark it as private, just so that it's clear. So I don't know, I'm kind of torn between those two. What
I'm also not
would your
certain.
votes be?
I feel like it would make sense to do public, from what Dallin was saying about like the kind of the idea of the government and public one might be more of that, but I get what Abby's saying too. I still feel like at a private institution, if you have corruption, it feels public, but I don't necessarily know that. What I was thinking is, I don't know if it happens frequently enough for it to be a problem. I mean, we could check and see, because I mean, from the ones that we've done, I can't think of anyone that, like, I don't think they regularly talk about schools or colleges. I feel like it's something, it's probably government related, it's probably something else that's
Yeah.
kind of, so I don't know if it matters, but that was just one thing I was thinking about.
Yeah, no, again, it's really great question. Right, I was kind of working from this assumption, but yeah, thinking about it, and that's a lot because of the historical gap. It's a bit trickier.
We could just do it without, we could just say we put schools in the public, we could put schools in other, if it really seems that way. But I think it might not come up that often. But I don't know. We could look
Right.
at it.
Yeah. Okay, so let's try this. We'll try to stay with the framework, right? Because again, assuming if this was corpus results from COCA or probably even Koha, it might be pretty easy to see, okay, is this BYU or is this the University of Utah? To use that as an analog. One is private, one is public. Okay, boom, easy. But yeah, if it's Virginia University, right? I think that's the one that was founded by Jefferson with that talked about religious freedom a lot. Yeah, I don't, in that case, I think it's private. So okay, let's say I'm just going to add a note here. So for the founding era, schools, the equivalent of our modern elementary or high school will be marked as GPI. And then we'll say higher education, colleges, universities, or like trade schools maybe. We'll mark that as private, BPI. And yeah, maybe, like you said, Amy, this won't even really come up and we get to this and like, okay, we're not seeing that. You know, once we move on from the founding era, we won't need to worry about this kind of special circumstance. But I think it's really good to try to anticipate the, you know, the outliers or the exceptions so we know what to do with them. So yeah, does that kind of resolve that potential
I think that
difficulty
makes
enough?
sense.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
I mean,
go ahead.
like you're saying about Jefferson, like, because it's a university and it feels more private with Jefferson establishing that and talking about things. So I think it really resolves it. I don't know how much we're going to get to talk about public education in general in it, because I feel like the only things I've seen that ever reference any kind of school is probably higher education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think it's fine. I just thought when you gave the example of like I bribe or I hate that my teachers get bribed, and I was thinking about it and I was like, wait a second, in this era would they say something like that? And it would be public. So that example is what made me think that. So we'll figure it out. I think it's good. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, no, this is great. This is definitely what we're wanting and what I appreciate, because yeah, I hadn't considered that. And yeah, so thank you for bringing that up for sure. Okay, let me just save that. Oh, don't do that. Save. Okay, so I'm trying to gauge, is the new blank sense kind of, is that too sticky, or how are you guys feeling about that? Does it kind of make sense why we want that, or what that means and when you would use it?
So it seems like the majority of things are going to be blank rather than other if it's kind of like ambiguous. Because you mentioned that in order to be like other, there has to be the sense of object or the sense of place kind of reference, but we don't know what it is. But I feel like that happens relatively rarely compared to just like it doesn't really talk about it. So, in your opinion, is that correct? That we'll probably be using blank more than we'll be using other?
Yeah, no, I think that you're right that based on what we've seen so far, when a lot of the times it has been marked as other because it's too ambiguous. Yeah, I think we are trying to swap a lot of that out for the blank, you know, for the absent aspect of that concordance line. But yeah, you asking that question makes me want to bounce that back to Brett, like asking if that's the outcome that's going to lead to, is that is that what we want? Do we want to have more blanks than others, or is that going to be equally unhelpful? Again, I think if I understand, the idea here is that, you know, it's going to be insightful to say bribery they don't talk about the object very often, as opposed to, oh, it's too ambiguous to tell what the object is.
Well, other also has different meanings attached to it, so I think it'll still be used for like duplicate source or a different meaning or multiple senses. But just as far as other and blank are like compared, would we be using blank more than other?
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I don't want to kind of create a self-fulfilling prophecy and that like, oh yeah, you'll probably use blank a lot because a lot of the lines don't talk about the object or the place. That might be true. Again, I don't want to kind of like encourage that necessarily. Not that it's bad to put blank, but yeah, I think that you are right, Abby, in that blank will probably come up a lot as an option. And so I would probably comment again that we don't need the concordance line to explicitly say, oh, he gave this person this thing as a bribe, but we're just not going to tell you what the thing is. It doesn't need to be that like, oh, it's too ambiguous. They're talking about the object. They're just not, it's too vague to know what the object is. I still think there's less of a distance between blank and other ambiguous in that way, where I think even some of the verbs that are used in the concordance line can help you know that, oh, there is an object here as the bribe. They're just not telling me what it is, versus, like we've seen some of these before where they're talking about all these, these vices, this deception and bribery and corruption. Then you would say, okay, they're not even commenting at all on what the bribery involves. And so maybe that's an example where we would use blank. So yeah, I think blank will come up a lot. But I think, yeah, there will still be ample opportunity to see ambiguous as an other sense that you can code, because, oh, there are some clues here that there was a thing given as a bribe or a thing received as a bribe, but I don't know what that was. So yeah, so I don't know if it feels like I'm dancing around this, or I feel like I'm not quite describing it very well, but I'll try to be sure to add in the instructions, like when you read through the line, yeah, and then maybe give you some more language to help give you a parameter for, okay, when is it just ambiguous or when is it blank? So, but yeah, that's a good question still. Yeah, don't feel bad. Don't feel like you're doing it wrong if you do get a lot of blanks. Just be confident in the way you're reading it and just being able to transparently explain that to the rest of the group when we're reviewing, and you happen to be kind of the outlier or the kind of the outsider coder in some of those particular lines. Okay, so that's all of the changes for sense of place. Move this over. So sense of object is pretty much the same. Some of the things, like I have removed the political and the generic header categories because I think this came up in the last meeting, but yeah, I don't think that there's ever a time where you would use just generic and not be able to specify whether it was tangible or an action, I think. And the same goes for political. Like if you can tell from the concordance line that it's a political object, then it's probably either the more broad political support or the more narrow political office. I can't foresee any other political object that doesn't fall into those two categories. But I'm going to keep the monetary header because I do think that, right, it'd be easy to come up with a sentence where, he filled his pockets with all the bribes received in his office. Okay, like he's getting money, but is it figurative, like he's metaphorically getting money through these different indirect means, or are people literally giving him cash that he's putting in his pockets? Okay, we know it's money, but we don't know if it's direct or indirect. So I think that the monetary, just M, is still useful, but if it's political or generic, I think you should be able to trim it down to, okay, this is just the more wide category of political support, or he's more specifically talking about office, or okay, it's generic. So it's going to be something done or said, or it's going to be, I don't know why plate of cookies is always the example I like to, but right, it's this object is tangible, but it's not something valuable that makes it the source of the bribe. One thing I wanted to note with generic is keep in mind that those two categories, generic action and generic tangible, and this is probably already clear to you, but if not, it's okay. Like those are exclusive, right? It's not, even though political support could be seen as a generic action, you're only going to put generic action because it's specifically, it's not political support, or indirect money. It's not a tariff or a regulation or something like that. And the same goes for generic tangible. We have that category specifically because I think there will be things that are used as bribes which are not money, which are not offices, which are not something like that. So yeah, again, that's not a problem that I've seen in the data, but that was just a question that Brett had that I wanted to make sure was clear for you guys. And this applies to pretty much all of the coding senses. Like these are meant to be mutually exclusive. They might overlap, multiple ones might apply, but I think that will be much less frequent than like it being a clear, separate, distinct use. So yeah, and then again, the same addition to other, if it's multiple senses, then mark other and then use the notes column to say which 2 or 3 senses you think could be used, and then blank. Oh, it's talking about bribery, but it's not talking at all about an object, and so it's not too ambiguous, it's just not addressed. Oh, what was the other thing with sense of object? Oh, hang on, what was it? Let me look at my notes. Oh, so there's one angle here that I don't want to try to get into like intentions with the coding, like, oh, what were the people's intentions, in the context of the source, because that was, I think, a problem we saw with like the legality or wrongness coding that we've dropped. But keep in mind maybe what the end goal or the ultimate motivations might be for the bribe. So Brett pointed out that, well, okay, maybe the object of the bribe is political support, but they're giving and receiving political support to affect, indirect monetary compensation. So like I've tried to specify, political support, right, that turns into like social capital, not financial gain, like favorable taxes. I would see that kind of like taxes as being monetary indirect. But maybe the political support isn't just meant to leverage social capital. It's not just, oh, I want your influence, I want you to come co-sponsor this bill. But it's because there's something beyond that where the object of the bribe is a means to an end, and not just the end in and of itself. So when I send this out, I'll try to give maybe some good examples for that, but just try to keep in mind, okay, what is the bribe either given or received? What is that trying to set in motion? Because that might help you separate between political support or monetary indirect. And maybe the context, right, it doesn't go much into that, and that's fine, but that was just something that came up when I was meeting with Brett, where he said, "Oh, how do you know that like the object or the goal of the bribe is isolated to just political support? Oh, um, I'm going to appoint you to this office if when you get to office you're going to do this, or I'm going to give you this money directly so that you will pass this bill." Okay, but maybe it extends beyond that. So I guess I would put it this way. Maybe we might say that there are multiple objects of the bribe, and I don't know if we'll see that or if that will be clear enough to code. But if you feel like coding the object of the bribe isn't isolated to a single category, then treat that the same as you would the new multiple senses principle that we set in place. You can mark it as other and say, oh, I think that they're using political support and monetary indirect, because it seems like the bribe is trying to do this or trying to accomplish that. So just take note that it's okay to think that it's not the end of the story, that political support is the object of the bribe, or that monetary indirect or something like that. If you feel like there's some overlap between those two, treat it like the multiple senses that we've created a way to describe in the other category. Okay, so that, those are all the changes, the revisions, the edits. Are there any questions with the sense of object or anything that we've talked about so far? I want to wrap up in the next few minutes. I don't like going longer than an hour for you guys. So how did that all go? Are we feeling clear, feeling good? Okay, awesome. Thumbs up from Amy. It looks like we lost Dallin a few minutes ago. Okay, awesome. But as always, if questions do come up, you can email me. Again, I'm going to try to give as much as I can. So I'm going to give some examples and maybe highlight some areas that I think I want to get a second opinion on from Brett to make sure that it's described clear enough. I think, fingers crossed, this is kind of where it needs to be, and we can pass this next sample with significant range of agreement. But if not, that's okay, and we'll just keep hammering away at it. So expect another email from me later today or tomorrow, and then can we try to have the sample done by Wednesday? Is that enough time for people?
Yeah, I think that's good.
Okay, thanks, Hannah.
If you could get it out today, though, that would be helpful.
Okay, totally. Yeah, I will. Yeah, I'll try to get it out to you today. But if I don't, and you need to take an extra day or two, Abby, that's okay. I understand too.
Well, I'm going backpacking, so I can't take an extra day.
Okay, I see. All right. Yeah, that would make it hard. Okay, cool. Well, thank you again. Talk to you later today and or next week. And then good luck with your coding.
Thank you.
See ya.